Billy Connolly career. Origin of the Big Inn. Connolly's nickname the Big Inn was first used during his adolescent years to differentiate between himself and his father. My father was a very strong man. Broad and strong. He had an 18.5-inch neck collar. Huge, like a bull. He was Big Billy and I was Wee Billy. And then I got bigger than him, and the whole thing got out of control. And then I became the Big Inn in Scotland. So, we'd go into the pub and someone would say, Billy Connolly was in. Oh? Big Billy or Wee Billy? The Big Inn. Oh, Wee Billy. If you were a stranger, you'd think, what are these people talking about? 1960s. In the early 1960s, Connolly attended the Edinburgh Festival Fringe for the first time. After spending time on the city's Rose Street, patronizing the various drinking establishments, he became enamored by some long-haired musicians and decided to model himself on them. In 1965, after he had completed a 5-year apprenticeship as a boilermaker, Connolly accepted a 10-week job building an oil platform in Biafra, Nigeria. Upon his return to the United Kingdom, via Jersey, he worked briefly at John Brown and Company but decided to walk out on a Fair Friday to focus on being a folk singer. After watching the Beverly Hillbillies, he bought his first banjo at the Barrowland Market. He began touring with a folky crowd, including regular stints at the Scotia Bar, on Stockwell Street, guided by folk singer Danny Kyle. I kind of introduced Billy to the folk clubs, such as there were in those days. There were very few in those days. We used to go to places like Saturday Late or the Montrose Street Glasgow Folk Club. Connolly formed a folk pop duo called the Humble Bums with Tam Harvey. In 1969, they were joined by Jerry Rafferty, who had approached Connolly after a gig in Paisley. The band signed for independent label Transatlantic Records, and after recording one album, 1969's first collection of Merry Melodies, Harvey left the trio, and Connolly and Rafferty went on to release 2 more albums, The New Humble Bums, 1969, and Open Up the Door, 1970. Connolly's time with Rafferty possibly influenced his future comedy, because years later he would recall how Rafferty's expert prank telephone calls, made while waiting to go on stage, used to make him scream with laughter. The albums were not big commercial successes but enjoyed cult status and critical acclaim. Connolly's contributions were primarily straightforward pop folk with quirky and whimsical lyrics, but he had not especially focused on comedy at this point. In 1968, a 26-year-old Connolly married Springburn native and interior designer Iris Pressa, with whom he had 2 children. They initially lived on Redlands Road in Glasgow's West End, but when fans began to wait out in the street, they moved to Dryman, near the southeastern shore of Loch Lomond. Later that year, Connolly's mother went to meet him backstage after a Humble Bums gig in Dunoon, where she was working in the cafeteria at Dunoon General Hospital. It was the second and final meeting between them since she abandoned Connolly. She had been living in the town with her partner, Willie Adams, with whom she had 3 daughters and a son. I went home to her house and stayed the night, instead of the hotel. The sadness is, she was a very nice woman, but we never got along. We both tried to like each other, and I don't think she liked me very much. I don't regret it, but I'm sad about it. I wish I liked her. And I wish she liked me. In 1971, the Humble Bums broke up, with Rafferty going on to record his solo album Can I Have My Money Back? Connolly returned to being a folk singer. His live performances featured humorous introductions that became increasingly long in duration. The head of Transatlantic Records, Nat Joseph, who had signed the Humble Bums and had nurtured their career, was concerned that Connolly find a way to develop a distinctive solo career just as his former bandmate, Jerry Rafferty, was doing. Joseph saw several of Connolly's performances and noted his comedic skills. Joseph had successfully nurtured the recording career of another Scottish folk entertainer, Hamish Imlock, and saw potential in Connolly following a similar path. He suggested to Connolly that he drop the folk singing and focus primarily on becoming a comedian. 1970s. In 1972, Connolly made his theatrical debut, at the Cottage Theatre in Cumbernauld, with a revue called Connolly's Glasgow Flourish. He played the Edinburgh Festival Fringe with poet Tom Buchan, with whom he had written the Great Northern Welly Boot Show, and in costumes designed by the artist and writer John Byrne, who also designed the covers of the Humble Bums records. Also in 1972, Nat Joseph produced Connolly's first solo album, Billy Connolly Live, a mixture of comedic songs and short monologues that hinted at what was to follow. In late 1973, Joseph produced the breakthrough album that propelled Connolly to British stardom. Recorded at a small venue, the Tudor Hotel in Airdrie, the record was a double album titled Solo Concert. Releasing a live double album by a comedian who was virtually unknown, except to a cult audience in Glasgow, was an unusual gambit by Joseph, but his faith in Connolly's talent was justified. Joseph and his marketing team, which included publicist Martin Lewis, successfully promoted the album to chart success on its release in 1974. It featured one of Connolly's most famous comedy routines, The Crucifixion, in which he likens Christ's Last Supper to a drunken night out in Glasgow. The recording was banned by many radio stations at the time. Building on his Scottish following, they broke Connolly throughout the UK. Connolly employed Frank Lynch as his first manager around this time. In 1974, he sold out the Pavilion Theatre in his hometown. In 1975, the rapidity and extent of Connolly's breakthrough was used to secure him a booking on Britain's premier TV chat show, the BBC's Parkinson. Connolly made the most of the opportunity and, ignoring objections from his manager, told a bawdy joke about a man who had murdered his wife and buried her bottom up so he'd have somewhere to park his bike. This ribald humor was unusually forthright on a primetime Saturday night on British television in the mid-1970s, and his appearance made a great impact. When I finished that show, I came back to Glasgow, and I was coming through the airport and the whole airport started to applaud. Connolly became a good friend of the host, Michael Parkinson, and now holds the record for appearances on the program, having been a guest on 15 occasions. Referring to that debut appearance, he later said, "That program changed my entire life." Parkinson, in the documentary Billy Connolly, erect for 30 years, stated that people still remember Connolly telling the punchline to the bike joke 3 decades after that TV appearance. When asked about the material, Connolly stated, "Yes, it was incredibly edgy for its time. My manager, on the way over, warned me not to do it, but it was a great joke and the interview was going so well, I thought, oh, fuck that. I don't know where I got the courage in those days, but Michael did put confidence in me." Connolly's success spread to other English-speaking countries, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. However, his broad Scottish accent and British cultural references made success in the US improbable. His increased profile led to contact with other celebrities, including musicians such as Elton John. John at that time was trying to assist British performers whom he personally liked to achieve success in the United States. He had released records in the US by veteran British pop singer Cliff Richard on his own Rocket label. John tried to give Connolly a boost in America by using him as the opening act on his 1976 US tour. But the well-intentioned gesture was a failure. John's American fans had no interest in being warmed up by an unknown comedian, especially a Scotsman whose accent they found incomprehensible. In Washington, "Some guy threw a pipe and it hit me right between my eyes," he told Michael Parkinson 2 years later. "It wasn't my audience. They made me feel about as welcome as a fart in a spacesuit." Connolly continued to grow in popularity in the UK. In 1975, he signed with Polydor Records. Connolly continued to release live albums and he also recorded several comedic songs that enjoyed commercial success as novelty singles, including parodies of Tammy Wynette's song Divorce, which he performed on Top of the Pops in December 1975, and The Village Peoples and the Navy, titled In the Brownies. In 1976, Connolly's first play, And Me Why a Bad Leg, opened in Irvine and toured in London. It was there that, after consuming a sizable amount of cocaine and alcohol, he collapsed on the floor of a recording studio. In 1979, Connolly met Pamela Stephenson, the New Zealand-born comedy actress, for the first time when he made a cameo appearance on the BBC sketch show Not the 9 O'Clock News, in which he was one of 4 regular performers. Returning to the stage, Connolly embarked on his big wee tour of Britain, performing 69 dates in 84 days. While backstage in Brighton, he met Stephenson for a second time. He confided in her that he was unhappy and that his current marriage was over. Back at his hotel, where they began an affair, he reportedly drank 30 brandies. "What I saw of him, particularly in that dressing room, was that he was about to die," Stephenson said. "He was very suicidal. He was throwing everything away, desperately trying to feel no pain at all. You know how you get a sense from some people when they are very self-destructive that there is something they are trying to bury? They've got something they are trying to forget, or they are trying to drown their sorrows? He was hurting in a very deep way. I thought, if I leave this man, he's going to die. Also in 1979, Connolly was invited by producer Martin Lewis to join the cast of The Secret Policeman's Ball, the third in the series of The Secret Policeman's Ball's fundraising shows for Amnesty International. Connolly was the first comedic performer in the series who was not an alumnus of the Oxford School of Middle-Class University-educated entertainers, and he made the most of his appearance. Appearing in the company of long-established talents such as John Cleese and Peter Cook helped elevate the perception of Connolly as one of Britain's leading comedic talents. Lewis also teamed Connolly with Cleese and Cook to appear in the television commercial for the album. 1980s. In 1981, John Cleese and Martin Lewis invited Connolly to appear in that year's Amnesty show, The Secret Policeman's Other Ball. The commercial success of the special U.S. version of The Secret Policeman's Other Ball film, Miramax Films, 1982, introduced Connolly to a wider American audience, who are attracted to the film because of the presence of Monty Python members. His on-screen presence alongside these performers, who were already familiar to Anglophile comedy buffs, helped lay down a marker for Connolly's eventual return to the U.S. in his own right 8 years later. En route to begin filming Water, 1985, in St. Lucia, Connolly drank an excessive amount of alcohol on the plane. Upon arriving on the island, he had dinner with the cast and crew, including Michael Caine. They had a jolly evening, then traveled back by bus through a part of the island that features steep cliffs on either side of a jungle road. As they careered along, Billy thought it would be a wheeze to cover the driver's eyes with his hands. "I'll guide you," insisted our drunken control freak. Left, right. More right. It was a game he had apparently played with his London driver. God knows how they managed to survive. Michael Caine apprehended Billy just in time to save the bus from plunging down a St. Lucian ravine. Excerpt from Billy by Pamela Stevenson, 2001. In 1985, he divorced Iris Pressa, his wife of 16 years. They had separated 4 years earlier, and he was awarded custody of their children Jamie and Kara. That same year, he performed an audience with, which was videotaped at the South Bank Television Center in front of a celebrity audience for ITV. The uncut, uncensored version was subsequently released on video. In July 1985, he performed at the Wembley leg of Live Aid, immediately preceding Elton John. On December 30, 1985, Connolly became teetotal, having been an alcoholic. "I don't miss drinking. It has taken me by surprise," Connolly stated 24 years later. "I miss the crack. I miss the joy of it all. The head-banging stupidity, the loveliness, the craziness of it. I miss it terribly." He recalls blackouts that he would fill in upon returning to sobriety. "Well, the memories stopped coming back. But when I drank, I would go, oh, I remember now. Psychologists call it state-dependent learning. That was frightening. I remember thinking, beware, Billy boy. Beware. All is not well. Do something." Regarding the decision he made to stay sober, "If Pamela goes away, I'm on my own. There's nothing. There's only me and it. So the choice becomes very apparent." In 1986, he visited Mozambique to appear in a documentary for Comic Relief. He also featured in the charity's inaugural live stage show, both as a stand-up and portraying a willing victim in his partner Pamela Stevenson's act of sawing a man in half to create two dwarfs. Connolly completed his first world tour in 1987, including 6 nights at the Royal Albert Hall in London, which was documented in the Billy and Albert video. When the Fox network aired Freedom Fest, Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday celebration in 1988, Connolly was still virtually unknown in the States, but his performance drew attention, particularly from producers, and interest in him grew. In March 1988, his father died after a stroke, the 8th of his life. His mother died 5 years later, in 1993, of motor neuron disease. Connolly and Stevenson married in Fiji on December 20, 1989. He had been living with her since 1981. "Marriage to Pam didn't change me, it saved me," he later said. "I was going to die. I was on a downward spiral and enjoying every second of it. Not only was I dying, but I was looking forward to it." 1990s. Although Connolly had performed in North America as early as the 1970s and had appeared in several movies that played in American theaters, he nonetheless remained relatively unknown until 1990 when he was featured in the HBO special Whoopi Goldberg and Billy Connolly in Performance, produced by New York's Brooklyn Academy of Music. Soon after, Connolly succeeded Howard Hesseman as the star of the sitcom Head of the Class for its final season. He would also take part on its spin-off series Billy. Connolly joined Frank Bruno and Ozzy Osbourne when singing the war song of the Erpneys in the Dreamstone. On June 4, 1992, Connolly performed his 25th anniversary concert in Glasgow. Parts of the show and its build-up were documented in the South Bank Show, which aired later in the year. In early January 1994, Connolly began a 40-date world tour of Scotland, which would be broadcast by the BBC later in the year as a 6-part series. It was so well received that the BBC signed him up to do a similar tour 2 years later, this time in Australia. The 8-part series followed Connolly on his custom-made Harley-Davidson trike. Also in 1995, Connolly recorded a BBC special, entitled A Scot in the Arctic, in which he spends a week by himself in the Arctic Circle. He voiced Captain John Smith's shipmate, Ben, in Disney's animated film, Pocahontas. In 1996, he appeared in Muppet Treasure Island as Billy Bones. In 1997, he starred with Dame Judi Dench in Mrs. Brown, in which he played John Brown, the favoured Scottish servant of Queen Victoria. He was nominated for a BAFTA Award and a BAFTA Scotland Award for Best Actor, as well as a Screen Actors Guild Award for Best Supporting Actor for his performance. In 1998, Connolly's best friend, Danny Kyle, died. "He was my dearest, oldest friend," Connolly explained to an Australian audience on his Greatest Hits compilation, released in 2001. It was Kyle who helped Connolly overcome his recoiling nature at being touched by others, a remnant of the abuse he endured as a child. "Every time it happened, Danny would just collapse with hysterics," said Pamela Stevenson. "That's not normal, Billy." Danny tried to be patient with him. "You'll have to relax. It's touchy-feely, you know, the way we live. We like to touch each other and we kiss, we're different. You'll have to calm down or you'll always be fighting." He performed a cover version of the Beatles song Being for the benefit of Mr. Kite on George Martin's 1998 album, In My Life. In November 1998, Connolly was the subject of a 2-hour retrospective entitled Billy Connolly, Erect for 30 Years, which included tributes from Dench, Sir Sean Connery, Whoopi Goldberg, Robin Williams, Dustin Hoffman, and Eddie Izzard. The special was released on DVD in North America in 2004. In 1999, after forming Tickety Boo Management Company with Malcolm Kingsnorth, his tour manager and sound engineer of 25 years, Connolly undertook a 4-month, 59-date sellout tour of Australia and New Zealand. Later in the year, he completed a 5-week, 25-date sellout run at London's Hammersmith Apollo. In 2000, he travelled to Canada for 2 weeks on a 13-date tour. 2000s. In 2000, Connolly starred in Beautiful Joe alongside Sharon Stone. The following year, he completed the third in his World Tour BBC series, this time of England, Ireland, and Wales, which began in Dublin and ended in Plymouth. It was broadcast the following year. Also in 2001, Stevenson's first biography of her husband, Billy, was published. Much of the book is about Connolly the celebrity, but the account of his early years provides a context for his humor and point of view. A follow-up, Bravemouth, was published in 2003. A fourth BBC series, World Tour of New Zealand, was filmed in 2004 and aired that winter. Also in his 63rd year, Connolly performed 2 sold-out benefit concerts at the Oxford New Theatre in memory of Malcolm Kingsnorth. He has continued to be a much in-demand character actor, appearing in several films such as White Oleander, 2002, The Last Samurai, 2003, and Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, 2004. He has played an eclectic collection of leading roles in recent years, including a lawyer who undertakes a legal case of biblical proportions in The Man Who Sued God, 2001, and a young boy's pet zombie in Fido, 2006. Also in 2005, Connolly and Stevenson announced, after 14 years of living in Hollywood, they were returning to live in the former's native land. They purchased a 120-foot, 37 meters, yacht with the profits from their house sale and split the year between Malta and the 12-bedroom Candacraig house in Stratton, Aberdeenshire, which they had purchased in 2008 from Dame Anita Roddick. Later in the year, Connolly topped an unscientific poll of Britain's favorite comedian conducted by the Network 5, placing him ahead of performers such as John Cleese, Ronnie Barker, Dawn French, and Peter Cook. In 2006, he revealed he has a house on the Maltese island of Gozo. He and his wife also have an apartment in New York City near Union Square. On December 30, 2007, Connolly escaped uninjured from a single-car accident on the A939 near Ballater, Aberdeenshire. 2010s. In 2011, Connolly and his wife were living full-time in New York City while still retaining their Candycraig residence. The Connollys decided to sell Candycraig House in September 2013, with a price of £2.75 million. In 2012, Connolly provided the voice of King Fergus in Pixar's Scotland-set animated film Brave, alongside fellow Scottish actors Kelly MacDonald, Craig Ferguson, Robbie Coltrane, Emma Thompson, and Kevin McKidd. Connolly appeared as Wilf in Quartet, a 2012 British comedy drama film based on the play Quartet by Ronald Harwood, directed by Dustin Hoffman. In 2014, Connolly appeared in The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies as Dane II Ironfoot, a great dwarf warrior and cousin of Thorin II Oakenshield. Sir Peter Jackson stated that we could not think of a more fitting actor to play Dane Ironfoot, the staunchest and toughest of dwarves, than Billy Connolly, the Biggin himself. With Billy stepping into this role, the cast of The Hobbit is now complete. We can't wait to see him on the battlefield. Steve Brown, Connolly's manager of 32 years, died in December 2017 at the age of 72. In 2018, Connolly, now resident in Florida, held his first art exhibit. He stated at the time that he will no longer be touring as a comedian.